So Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker has hit theaters, and it is time to talk spoilers. If you haven't seen the movie yet, spoilers will begin in, I don't know, about a minute. You have been warned. Please leave this video, go watch the movie, come back, and join the conversation. If you're new to my spoiler reviews, they're much more podcast style. I'm intentionally just trying to lay out all of my different thoughts. There's not as much B-roll. They're not edited as much. It's my personality just talking about the movie. For this one, I went topical. So down below in the description, there's a long list of topics inside of the movie, kind of following the flow of the film, but not exactly, with time code. So you can skip ahead to whichever things you want to hear me talk about. Though I would love it if you stayed to watch the entire video. Also, be sure to share your thoughts down below in the comment section. No need for spoiler warnings. You can just spoil away. This is a spoiler video. So the thumbnail, the title, all gave the spoiler warning. They have been warned. You can spoil away. With that said, let's get started with me kind of sharing my thoughts on the movie after a second viewing, as well as my thoughts on the trilogy as a whole. Now it's kind of disjointed. Essentially, watching it a second time, it affirmed everything that I said before. I didn't have any drastic shifts or changes. You know, I'd lower my entertainment score just a little bit marginally, probably watching it a second time, but essentially I had the same exact vibe about it, which is to say that it's a movie that has all the Star Wars adventure that I liked. I'm okay with the twists, the reveals, kind of the general idea of where they went with things, but it just felt like two movies crammed into one. We'll talk about that in just a second. And because that, it's not as satisfying as it should be. It's not as good as it should be. It rushes through a lot of things. It has to kind of cut corners to put the pieces together and things like that. Just has to state some stuff. It just shows up. All of that is true, but like, what was my experience watching the movie? It was like I had fun watching it. It's an okay Star Wars movie that entertained me, took things in a direction I was okay with, though didn't necessarily delivered the best experience. The movie itself should have been better. But the more interesting, I think, is what does it mean about the trilogy as a whole now that we can look back at this whole prequel trilogy or sequel trilogy? And I read a tweet right after I saw the movie that I thought said it pretty well, in that this is one of the weirdest trilogies in recent memory, as it feels like every single successive movie in the film actively dislikes the previous film inside of it. It's all over the place, very clearly, whatever roadmap they had. I mean, they abandoned it or what. I don't know what was going on, but you watch The Last Jedi or you watch The Force Awakens, and there's certainly some intrigue about the First Order and Rey's parents and who is Snoke and where's all this going and what's Luke gonna do. And then you get to the movie, subverts our expectations, and there's, Snoke's just gone, Rey's a nobody, and Luke's grumpy. And you're like, ooh, what just happened? And then that movie doesn't really set up what's next. It doesn't give you any sort of idea of what the growing threat could be or anything like that. You just know the resistance is just about toast. And then you get to this movie, and even though the resistance was just about toast at the end of Last Jedi, JJ's like, but the real threat is way out there. Palpatine and this whole fleet. He's got this massive fleet. So it's like, all right, immediately we're just going in a different direction from where Last Jedi left things. And then you go through the movie and just plot point by plot point by plot point of the things that Last Jedi was like, yeah, that doesn't matter. Yeah, her parents, that doesn't matter. And Snoke, he's out of the question. Kylo's the new supreme leader. It gives an answer to all of those different things that people are like, what? We wanted a better answer than that. Well, you got a better answer. So each of the movies feels like an active response and rebuttal to the previous film in a very weird kind of way that I just don't know what I would love to know what Kathleen Kennedy was actually thinking with all of this, and did she have a plan? I just don't understand at all what I'm looking at here, what they put out, and even the statements that JJ is making about Last Jedi and the cast. It's so weird. And even Rian Johnson's joined in too and basically rebutted essentially what Rise of Skywalker is like, I don't think you do your fans a service when you just do fan service. Like, he said things like that. And it just makes for such a bizarre trilogy of movies that don't like each other, and they keep bickering with each other about what Star Wars should be. And that's essentially kind of where I still land on it, in that I had fun with it. I'm very confused by it. I really don't even know where I'll stand a year from now. except to say that I enjoyed it and I was okay. Actually, as of right now, watching it sometimes, I still had fun. The action still worked for me. I liked the characters, the character moments, and but it's a messy, very messy movie. And I watched it and I thought, this is gonna have the lowest Rotten Tomatoes score of any Star Wars movie. Like it's just, this is not a critics movie. It feels like course correction the movie. I don't know, like people are gonna be all over the place on this thing, and they are. People are saying they love it. And I think a part of that, which will lead me to my next point inside of this, is that Star Wars has the problem of being a franchise now that multiple generations have grown up with it. And like for me, I don't remember ever being a time when I wasn't a Star Wars fan. And the Skywalker Saga is now thus my lifetime. Up to this point in time, all of my life I've been watching the Skywalker Saga. And this movie was the conclusion to the Skywalker Saga. And really no movie can live up to that. Especially when there have been these kind of missteps and course corrections and a divided fan base. There's just no movie that they can make that lives up to my childhood and all of that nostalgia and all of my anticipation. And I think that's a big part of the problem. I mean, you can see it in the divisions inside of the fan bases that have always kind of been there, going back to Return of the Jedi, when the original fans of the original film grew up, you know, by 4 years by the time Return of the Jedi comes out. And so a bunch of them are like, Ewoks, what are these? But I grew up with Ewoks, so I never had any problems with Ewoks. And then I was going to be a senior in high school when the prequel started. And so then I was kind of at that age where I was like, well, this is weird. And then had grown up to enough that I noticed the oddities inside of it. So by the time Revenge of the Sith came out, I was just pretty cynical towards it because of how much it just felt like a more kiddie version of things, and just there were some faults to it. But people that grew up with the prequels and with Clone Wars have much more reverence for those films than my generation does, because the prequels didn't live up to my childhood. They didn't live up to what I'd come to expect, and didn't provide that experience of this thing that so defined my love for movies and fantasy and spaceships and adventure. The prequels didn't live up to that. And so Force Awakens comes out, and it doesn't necessarily live up to that, but it provides the nostalgia. Why it seemed like a lot of us were united in liking it, because it was the nostalgia play. It didn't do something new with it, but it provided that experience and that vibe and felt like we were back in that place. And then the audience was, of course, divided again in the film since then. And I just don't know that anything can live up to my childhood. The whole experience, no movie's good enough to live up to all of that. And I suspect that's a little bit of what we're seeing right now, is that people went in wanting a movie. They didn't need it to actually live up to their childhood, but at the same point in time, it just feels like such a disappointment when it is this clunky movie with a lot of problems. And, you know, there's a lot of commentary coming on the internet now of what if people applied the logic that we're currently using to the old movies. And there's a lot of truth to that those movies, if you apply this kind of the cynical skepticism that we were holding this trilogy to the original ones, there's a lot of problems inside of it. What, another Death Star? What, teddy bears are showing up? What's this whole first act of Return of the Jedi that's going nowhere? Like, wait, was Luke only trained for like 2 days? Did he get a weekend of training and that's all he got? Wait, they just blew up a planet and now we're not even crying about it anymore. We're like, Princess Leia just had her homeworld blown to pieces. Now she's just joking around with Han Solo. You can take all of these criticisms of the movies and apply them backwards. And those movies they're not perfect, obviously. But I think as viewers, the older we get, we of course mature in our tastes and things like that. And we become more cynical. And I think as a general viewing audience right now has a much more critical eye for things. And that makes it difficult to make a Star Wars movie that's not going to be torn to pieces. And of course, that's what we've seen the last several years, of like the audience just being split. Whether you want the Rian Johnson, let's do something different and do a deconstruction of heroes in the world of Star Wars, or do you want fan service, the movie that delivers exactly what you expected? The audience is torn and we're heading in very different directions, and nothing can live up to our childhood. Next thing I want to talk about is how this felt like it was 2 different movies crammed into one, or maybe 3 different movies crammed into one. And I think at the source of most of my biggest frustrations with this film, it comes down to this concept right here. And a lot of other people, I think that's a lot of what you're seeing, is that essentially J.J. Abrams had the direction that he wanted to go, where he wanted to end things. Like, how do we have a conclusion that bookends the whole saga? Last Jedi doesn't really set up a conclusion to the whole saga. There's like not really, look at the plot points in the movie. There's not an obvious way to like, okay, now here's how we're going to close out a trilogy of trilogies. So J.J. Abrams says, okay, if we're going to do that, there have always been these lineages. Palpatine started the whole thing. There has to be a big threat, a final battle for it all. So bring back Palpatine to kind of have the guy that's always been the mastermind. And we'll get to him a little bit later. In which case, you have two movies here. You have kind of, all right, I have to set up the big finale, and then we have to have the big finale. And when you cram all of that into 2.5 hours, those are two really big epic concepts for a movie that just, they're mashing them together, in which case the whole thing feels rushed. I think if you took Rise of Skywalker and have the movie end right when they leave Death Star 2. So it ends with, was Kylo just redeemed? Like, is he back? Is Ben Solo back? And you take the revelation that's in the opening scene of the movie that Palpatine has this huge, massive fleet that's way too big. It's ridiculously oversized, the size of this army, the fleet. That's, I think it's one of those things that right off the bat, some people watch the movie and they went, what? The fleet's that size? Where are they at? Where they get the materials? And I think that half the audience, they lost them immediately because it's just too big of an ask to be like, guy, how did he build all this with no one noticing? What just happened? Like, you're saying magic did all this? What are you implying and saying right now? But anyway, we'll get to that in a second. But you take that reveal that he has his own fleet and he's going to blow up planets, and you move it to the end of this movie. So the movie is the adventure of them on this quest to try and find out where Palpatine is at. And they don't even know what his scheme is. And then the big reveal at the end of the film, or the big victory of the film, is that Rey, or actually maybe the end of the movie ends, like I said, at that point in time, Rey goes off, like she's thinking, like, I'm a Palpatine, I'm just going to go off like Luke did. Kylo is there, no longer maybe turning into Ben, and then we learn that there's this massive fleet that's going to start blowing up planets, and the Resistance is like, wait a minute, last time we asked for help, no one showed up. And so you end the movie where Rey kind of defeated Kylo, and they found the item they're looking for. They know where they need to go, but they don't have the forces to defeat it. So it ends kind of with a Empire Strikes Back kind of bittersweet victory inside of it. And then the last movie is set up for the battle and the battle itself. So all of this gets more time to kind of play out instead of it just being like, the Emperor's back, he's got a fleet, we got to stop him. You play that out over a whole movie where it's slowly revealed and it feels a lot more earned. And all throughout both movies, you start introducing these characters like, I don't know if we can fight the First Order, and you tease it for a while. And then you get to this movie where they're like, we don't know that we have a fleet. In the movie that we got, there's a whole subplot about Lando flying around with the Millennium Falcon to all these star systems recruiting people that's not in the movie. Like, they write it like, Lando, go get people. And then you get to the movie and he shows up in the portal sequence. Excuse me. The cavalry rescue sequence where he shows up and you're like, okay, cool, but that's a 25-minute subplot in a movie that's just not there. So now you make the last hour of this movie after the Death Star a whole movie in and of itself where they're trying to do this battle against and it's all earned. And you have time to have Kylo and Rey actually do stuff together. You get to spend a lot more time with Ben Solo than like 5 minutes of him not talking and like sneaking around and then beat some, like you can actually do something with the character. So it's all more satisfying if you have a proper movie of setup and a proper movie of payoff. What we got was mash them all together. And I think so many of the frustrations, the disappointments, it just feels like cheap fan service is because none of it got to be, it was microwaved. It was a microwaved movie. It's like, let's cram it all in there and cook it. Now, I like TV dinner, so it worked for me well enough. But a lot of other people are like, no, we need to like slow cook this thing. Like, let's smoke these ribs overnight. Let's not just toss them into the microwave. J.J. Abrams, because Last Jedi didn't set up his movie. He just had to toss this thing into the microwave, and this is what we got. Next, we're gonna talk about the return of Palpatine. So the movie kicks off, we got the crawl, and it says, the dead speak, and you hear it, and we're like, whoa, okay, they're going straight to this whole Palpatine thing. And then we go to Kylo Ren on a little mission in slow-mo, which is pretty different from the way they've started any of the other Star Wars movies, because it's almost like montage style. Once again, you feel like you have this whole subplot about Kylo Ren seeking out Palpatine that if that was a movie in and of itself, a 2.5 hour movie about this quest to find the Emperor and to find the map to him, and both sides are hunting him down, and the big reveals at the end of the film. If you do that, suddenly the sequence with Kylo at the beginning battling people is like a sequence, not just this little montage, and then he flies up there, and then they just deliver exposition for the rest of the movie. But so what do I think about the return of Palpatine? I think it works. I do. I get why a lot of people are like, oh, just a cheap, just under. I kind of get where it feels cheap. I don't get when people are like, it undermines everything that Anakin sacrificed. I don't get that, because Anakin sacrificed himself. Empire dies. Emperor disappears for 35 years. He's mounting his comeback tour, and he's like manipulating things, but it takes him 35 years to make this stuff happen. So that whole thing that he'd built up was torn down. That's a big thing that Anakin did, to take down, removing him for 35 years, taking the Empire down. That's something. That's not nothing. It is something. And so I don't like this whole kind of all or nothing. Either Anakin saved everything or else he did nothing. I just don't understand that entire mindset. So the idea that he did this huge act that stopped it, Emperor tries to mount his comeback tour, and then we get this movie and it's like, nah, you failed at your comeback tour. I can be fine with that. And then likewise, the idea that if you're going to close out the saga, if you're not going to say that the movies just kind of keep going, if you want to say it's the Skywalker Saga and this is the bookend, I mean, you need to have actual bookends in there. And so I think Palpatine is a bookend. You go back to the Phantom Menace and he's manipulating things from that opening scene. He is the one, he's the counter to this. These Skywalkers are the ones that are trying to be the heroes inside of it. And he's always been the mastermind. So it makes sense that throughout this whole thing that he would be that person. So I just think it works. As a concept, I understand the execution feeling rushed, and it's just he's just there, and then they just used a few lines of dialogue to explain how he's back. If it doesn't work for you for those reasons, I get that. But he is the bookend. He is that thread throughout the whole thing that kind of makes sense as to where'd Snoke come from. Oh, Palpatine's in a weakened state, and so he created this being to okay, I can buy that. And once again, if we had more time with him, they could have not that I wanted to overly explain it. I think because of who Palpatine was, what he said inside of Revenge of the Sith, what he did throughout all of the prequels with the clones, and just the whole idea of the mysterious side of the Sith, I can pretty easily buy into the fact that there's a cult of the Sith that do dark science that involves cloning. We already know the Force has some things about all sorts of dark powers of cheating death, and all the idea of Force ghosts and things like this, that the consciousness continues on, the mind is still there. So the idea that presence of a Force ghost on the Jedi side could then be trapped in this dark magic machine thing, clone item thing, whatever exactly he was, we don't know. But I buy that. That fits with what we know inside of this world of things. I can get there. That's not too big. Him going, and then all these ships rise up. That's a much bigger pill for me to swallow than that Palpatine, cloned himself or had a group of people that could clone him, bring him back, and whatever the consciousness, however that worked. I can buy that much, much, much easier. So I think I was very okay with kind of the way it played out. I was actually surprisingly okay with how little they explained, especially on second viewing. I was like, yeah, I mean, that's good enough for me. That all that fits with what we know about the Star Wars universe, what he does, what his expertise is. I buy it. I'm down with it. In a totally different direction, we've got Leia training Rey, as well as just the inclusion of Carrie Fisher. And I thought that was a really nice touch and worked pretty well. Now, I expect, both viewings, I think you could, it'd be interesting to know how someone interpreted the Leia performance if they didn't go into it fully knowing that they're watching a dead person. I wonder how they would take it, because as someone that knows the trickery that they used, that they went, oh, we had this extra footage, how could we do this? So I saw it and I went, oh, wow, they really did a good job of incorporating her into the Force and the coloring. So like, obviously this is actually pretty impressive what they're able to do right here. And then the way her performance interacted with other people, it like didn't feel like her performance was with the other people. It felt like they were building their performances around what they had of her. But I knew that's what they were doing. Like, I'm watching the scene knowing the trick that they did. So I wonder how that would have played out for someone that didn't have that knowledge. And I wonder how other people kind of interpreted that. Because it was like, this is incredible that they found a way to do this. I don't know that it almost lines up, but not quite, is what's kind of the way that I felt inside of it. But the idea of Leia training Rey I thought was pretty neat. Because it sort of got implied in Last Jedi and Force things, and then you would think that Luke would have spent some time with her, and this movie kind of confirms that that did happen, and it makes sense in light of who their characters were and what they might have done. And so it was kind of neat to have Leia get that mentor role and do that. Like that, I think that fleshes out her character quite a bit. So just in general, I liked what they did there, the concept of it, and they did the best they could with what they could do with Carrie Fisher in a way that honored her, incorporated her far more in depth than I was expecting they were able to. Though, like I said, that performance feels like they're using what they could to do what they were able to do. And like writing this person's line of dialogue based off of her, what she said here, and you're like, okay, man, of course it's I don't want to undermine the tragedy of her actual death, but you just wonder what could have been. What they were thinking, what that would have looked like if that wouldn't have happened. But of course, the tragedy of her actual death is far more important than, me getting a movie. So then our movie kicks into high gear and we get this MacGuffin story. If you don't know what a MacGuffin story is, that means it's basically a story that's about trying to track down an item. So the Indiana Jones movies are all MacGuffin movies. There's an item out there that they're all trying to find and track it down. An item drives the plot forward. So that's what this is that they're like, all right, we're trying to find this device that'll take us to this place over here. All kicking it off with, I thought, a pretty little fun sequence there with the Millennium Falcon getting the information from the spies. Very cool little planet that they stop by, and then the TIE fighters, and then the hyperspace jumping stuff. I thought, fun new thing to show us about the Millennium Falcon, as well as the idea. It sets up that nice scene where it's on fire and BB-8's a little bit beat up and they're bantering back and forth, and you immediately understand the dynamic between Poe and Rey, who we haven't really seen interact before. We only saw them meet each other, and now we're getting the vibe that like these two people respect one another, but they annoy each other quite a bit and have a fun little banter between the two of them. And then we go off on our little adventure and we go to our sand planet. I wish they would have done one that wasn't, so Tatooine, Jakku-esque, because we've been to a lot of sand, desert planets like that before. So that would have been nice to have been a better planet. But, I enjoyed that it was a MacGuffin story, because that's very Star Wars-y, but not very Star Wars movie. Like this game that just came out, Jedi Fallen Order. I enjoyed it, kind of, had some frustrations with it, but the idea of like there's all these relics out there that people are hunting down, that's played into so much of the extended universe inside of the games, and in the movies that hasn't really been something they've done. So doing that here, I liked that immediately. I was like, oh yeah, it's kind of like getting nerdy with our Star Wars stuff, and like so all these relics that we hunt down that have and there's daggers that have been crimson. I loved that aspect of it because it just felt like all this other Star Wars stuff that we haven't seen in the cinematic format before. I think J.J. Abrams is very good with action sequences, and so even, doing that chase sequence where these stormtroopers are getting launched into the air and stuff like that, all of that kind of worked for me. The thing that didn't work as well in the MacGuffin chase was, the Knights of Renn following them, and maybe this just kind of comes down to the fact that they just had to rush through so many things, but it's like the Knights of Renn are just constantly right on their tail, but not really taking them out. They're in the asteroid field. They do the Boba Fett maneuver. And so then, our heroes leave and the Knights of Ren ship kind of pulls around and follows them. And then we get to the next planet. Our people are like snooping around. They turn a corner and then the Knights of Ren walk out. And it like played out in this way that it's like several moments from like a Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where some people are being followed by these different groups. But it didn't necessarily make sense in this context, the way it played out. I wish they, once again, if some of this stuff could have been cooked a little bit longer, it would have sat probably better with a bunch of people, including myself. But I like the planet hopping aspect to it. That's once again why I wish this was just a movie in and of itself that was an Indiana Jones movie, basically as Star Wars, without needing to have the final battle attached to it. Let's just do Last Crusade, the Star Wars movie, Star Wars Episode 9A, The Last Hope. There we go. It's a Last Crusade reference, The Last Hope, something like that. And I think that could have been a lot of fun. But yeah, inside of it, what I also enjoyed is that we met some new characters that kind of fleshed out these other people. And I guess I'll get to that in just a second. Things I didn't like, the fake deaths. I thought that was weird. That like Chewie died. We lost Chewie. Just kidding. He's back. And then like, oh, we're about to delete C-3PO. It's like, I'm saying goodbye to my friends for the last time. I'm like, I don't think they're going to do this. Like, this doesn't feel real. And both of them had this vibe of like, you're not really doing this because this is just like such a crappy way to do this. Like, oh, Chewie walked around the corner, got captured off screen, and then he got blown up by Rey by accident. Are we really going to kill Chewie that way? I don't think so. So I didn't buy into it. And then it's like, okay, honestly, what you're trying to convince me is that C-3PO's memory can't be saved? Like, I don't believe that. That doesn't sound real to me. So it feels like you're trying to just force tension into moments that's not fully earned. Once again, microwave tension, not slow-cooked tension inside of it. That's frustrating, that those types of moments that it just felt like they had to like try and build tension that wasn't entirely earned. But one thing I really enjoyed about this movie, as I just alluded to just a second ago, is that we got a little bit more kind of context and backstory about Poe and Finn by the people we meet on our little planet hopping adventure. So, right off the bat, we go to a planet where Poe's got some connections, and then kind of, I guess, his old crew shows up, and it kind of answers a question that is an interesting question of what was Poe doing before all of this? That he's the best, like, we know he's the best pilot in the Resistance. Why is he why is he such a good pilot? What has he been up to? And you go, oh, he's a smuggler that was, this kind of criminal guy with a crew. Okay, that's a fun little answer to all of this. Now we have an answer inside of this series and kind of what's his connection to his people that he used to work with, and you kind of seeing him as this hero inside of it. I enjoyed all of that. There's little things. It doesn't need to be this whole backstory. We don't need to explain everything about it, but just understanding that he was a person before he showed up in these movies. Likewise, then with Finn, we meet this group of people on our Endor moon, and they're like Finn. They're stormtroopers that, for whatever reason, in the moment, they were like, going to clicks in their brain, I'm not going to kill civilians. And that's an interesting idea that's almost like sets up this whole other thing that you kind of, if we had these two movies that I keep alluding to, you set that up in movie one, that there's a whole bunch of stormtroopers that could snap out of it, or that have snapped out of it. There's this whole percentage of people out there that creates a little idea that creates a big payoff in movie number two. And to draw the contrast with what I'll do later again in this, that's one of the things that Endgame did so well, is that it found all the little moments throughout all these films that could be setups for payoff in their big movie. What would be really potent stuff, the little ideas and moments. And because they had enough time and planning for all of it and did a 2-movie conclusion, they could set it all up so it just has this huge payoff that feels earned. And Endgame has way more fan service than Rise of Skywalker, but people didn't complain, very little complaining about it because all of it felt earned, whereas microwave fan service, Rise of Skywalker, leaves people with a bad taste in their mouth. So you make this 2 movies and you have this whole thing about the stormtroopers and some of them turned, and that suddenly turns into this whole group of people that could be a really nice payoff or a twist inside of it. Like one of the things that Finn does in the conclusion, in the final battle, is that like he gets on a radio and he says, stormtroopers, like, I was one of you, I was F, and he says, his call sign, and she's there and says, mine's the call sign. You don't have to serve these people. You don't have to. And so then you get like this huge percent of the stormtroopers actually turn. They snap out of it. And then you have the Sith troopers. And so stormtroopers versus Sith troopers inside of it. Even like I'm getting excited talking about my better version of these movies. But I enjoy it. Like there's an idea there that I wish we could have gotten more of and fleshed it out. And likewise with, Poe's had the payoff. It did kind of, she shows up in the final battle, but that could have even expanded a little bit more of his whole crew or other people he was connected with potentially showing up in him, his vision of hope and resistance, inspiring them to then, show up in that final battle. Then we'll talk about the big reveal of the movie, Rey's actual family line. She is a Palpatine. And once again, going back to what I talked about with Palpatine, I am okay with this. I think it could have been handled better if we'd slow cooked it, not microwaved it. That is the whole overarching theme of this review. I wish I had written that down before I started because I figured that out as I was talking in this podcast style one. It's like, I love the language of that. But I mean, they had to microwave it. They couldn't fully set it up. But with the nature of Star Wars, that's very much cyclical in nature. It's about family lines and the big names running throughout this whole thing that are important. Palpatine, Skywalker, and then you have this whole idea of what if their lines have this kind of connection inside of it. I think that's, there's this rising inside the Force, and who are those two forces? It's the two families that are so important. That does go back to what was set up in The Force Awakens. It makes sense inside of it, and I think there's a lot of things you can do with that kind of really potent, powerful themes that could have been a little bit better, had more of an emotional punch to it. In the idea that their family line isn't the thing that matters most, in that Ben comes from the same line as Leia and Luke, the heroes, and then he still turned evil because, Daddy or Grandpa was a bad guy. And then over here, she's coming from Palpatine, and his kids were like, I don't like him so much. Let's stay away from him. And then she turns out good. And so it's not about your family line. It's not about one or the other. Like, it's what you do with it. Like, that's real profound stuff that was in there, but it doesn't really build as a theme, doesn't come to a point to where it like pays off particularly well. The ideas are just kind of in there a little bit and not done all that well. And it's to the credit of The Last Jedi. Love or hate the movie, it did a much better job of stating its thesis, its premise, making its point. They're articulated a lot more clearly than J.J. Abrams. J.J. does the roller coaster ride a lot better than he does, like, let's say something. I think Rian Johnson was able to say something. I didn't like what he wanted to say. A lot of you didn't like what he wanted to say, but he said it pretty well. So I dug it, and I think the more I sit on it, I'll probably only kind of settle into, I didn't like the execution of a lot of this, but the ideas, I think I'm very much okay with going back to that idea of once you see the movie play out, you go, this is the Skywalker Saga. It's Skywalkers versus Palpatines. That's what it is. Or Skywalkers versus the Palpatine, Emperor Palpatine. And I mean, that just makes sense to me. So the idea of bringing her into it, I think it does kind of tie things together better. And I just wish I don't know if JJ was actually thinking that back in Force Awakens, or if that was like, we need to course correct after what Ryan did. I don't know if they told Ryan that. Like, I would love to know how all this came about. So I wish it had been built up, set up better. At the same time, I talked about it in my reviews of the original Star Wars trilogy. George Lucas's reveal of who Luke's dad was a very late addition in the scheme of things. That he'd written drafts of Empire Strikes Back had been written before he came up with that idea. And so Star Wars has always kind of been made up as it went along. It's well documented. Despite George Lucas saying, I had a map all from the beginning. I read this one script, it was too big, and I cut it into 3 pieces. That's an extreme oversimplification to the point of distortion. That's not really what he did. And so, in light of even the history of Star Wars, I can be okay with them putting things together as they go along. That's the Star Wars way a little bit. And like I said, I think this movie needed to be 2. I've said that 1,000 times now. But at the end of the day, I think I like the overall idea of it. And then we have the redemption of Ben Solo. So we end up on Death Star 2, have our lightsaber battle where Kylo is desperately trying to get Rey to team up with him to conquer the universe and take out Palpatine with him. And she's like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't like any of you guys. So they have their big battle. And in the midst of it, I kind of want to, this is one of that, if you want to tell me your interpretations of exactly what went down here, did Leia only use the last of all of her force power just to send a message that was to say his name? Or how much of it was like she just did more than that? Like felt unstated exactly what Leia did, because the most literal interpretation is all she did was distract him for a moment and die. And therefore he felt that. And then he felt a saber in his gut. And then Rey saved him, and that's what turned him. I guess I would interpret it a little bit more of, she kind of sent her energy, her everything that she had to boom, shake his mind a little bit to kind of rock him out of it. Rey stabs him, and then that has the doubly power to it. And so he's just in this state of kind of processing everything, and so he starts having visions of his dad and things like that. But I don't know. I think that really the same theme as everything else. The idea of it, that Leia kind of sacrifices herself with this force, boom, burst to her son, and then Rey's her anger and viciousness was immediately followed by her graciousness and her healing. I think there's some things inside of that are potent, but the movie itself doesn't state what happens well enough. And therefore, I think that it makes for an execution problem. The running theme of all of this, that it's just a little bit too unclear as to what exactly it was that snapped him out of it entirely, that in a moment Kylo Ren is dead. And I mean, is it that just she put her force into him, but then her force is good? But I mean, she just did an act of violence against him. So I don't know, was it? I don't know. I think that needed to be more defined as to exactly how to interpret all of that. In general, I think the idea of having him be redeemed is good. When we get into the third act, I'll have more thoughts on that. But I don't know how satisfying it is to. He just keeps going evil and just keeps on going and going and going until things have to go somewhere, and just him just going down the path of evil, I don't know, just doesn't seem very interesting to me. I guess maybe it's the safe, obvious one that you want to have the redemption arc inside of it, but I just don't like stories where it's like he was evil and then he killed his dad and then his mom died trying to save him and he kept being evil. That just doesn't sound like one straight line to evil. Doesn't sound interesting to me either. So you want to what is the thing that turns him? That's always what's interesting. So I'm glad that we had redemption in there. And it seems like he kind of getting ahead of myself, but he also had to die, because even though he's redeemed and Rey gets that, and Rey understands the tension that was inside of him, he shows up at Resistance and he's like, hey guys, I'm Ben now. I don't think that people would have liked him very much. I don't think that would have been a nice, hey, awesome, let's give him a hug, the way that Rey could understand the tension and the conflict that comes from the Force. So I think you almost kind of had to. I thought in the movie for a second that when the Resistance was teaming back up after Leia's died, and then the people, Rey takes off and Kylo's left behind, I thought for a second maybe he was going to show up at the Resistance base to be like, let me help lead, let me take you there, I can lead the way. And I was like, I don't know if how that's gonna go. And then it obviously didn't do that. So I like that they did it. I think all the pieces were there. And then we have our sequence where Rey kind of gives up for a little bit and goes to throw away her saber and burn it all down to follow Luke's example. And then he shows up to kind of give her a little bit of a pep talk. It's a weird sequence in the movie because it's hard to not take it as this movie just slapping around Last Jedi. I mean, it is just such a gesture. She throws away her lightsaber, or his lightsaber. He catches it, walks out with it, and is like, that's no way to treat a Jedi's weapon. What are you doing? And so then you start to see kind of the Luke that we wanted to see. Many of us wanted to see, not everybody. I don't want to speak for everyone. That Luke that kind of I wanted to see in the previous movie, you get him here a little bit more, and a nice, fulfills the arc of what he went through The Last Jedi. Kind of a nice little sequence where he's like, you have everything that you need, and this is the path of a Jedi, and he's kind of come full circle and realized that, he made a mistake, and then, I think it kind of redeems Luke for me more so than the final act of Last Jedi did, because it's like he's on the other side of all of this, of being like, no, like I shouldn't have given up on everything. There is criticisms, there's a reason but like he snapped out of that phase of mind. So there's some nice things inside of it, and I liked the way it plays out. You're like, oh yeah, he does have his X-Wings there because he never left. So it kind of like ties together the fact that like he didn't go to save the day, and he wasn't the person that rushed in as the cavalry in Last Jedi. He just did kind of his little trick there, and because he did his little trick, there's an X-Wing right there, and because she stole his Kylo Ren's TIE fighter, she's got the other thing. Like, I like the way all that kind of played together, and he's like, you got everything that you need. And then so she kind of goes for it. So I thought it was a nice little sequence and kind of payoff to close things out, while at the same time being a little bit like, the way you're doing this is a little bit uncomfortable, because it just feels so much like you're just smacking around the previous movie, and I don't know that I like watching that. So that brings us to our big final showdown inside of it, the space battle in particular. And I don't know. I think that JJ, oddly enough, I like a lot of the action inside of his movies, but specifically his space battles and his lightsaber battles don't actually do much for me. They don't seem to have like a clear style to them. Or like when it's simple chases, like when it's the Millennium Falcon running from something, I like it when he does that stuff. But when he does the big space battles, they seem to lack clear focus as to what's going on. So we get this one, and once again, it just kind of felt rushed in what they had to do, because they show up and it's like, we have to destroy that thing right there. Oh, they're not going to use that. It's going to be this ship right over here. So let's go over there. Oh, all right, let's unload our people there. Is it moving very quickly through the plot points of it? Once again, if this was a movie in and of itself that's all about this final battle, it would have much more time to kind of play through that, make it a story, and not just rush through plot points. So we get to that battle on the ship, and I actually like the stuff, the ground battle side to it on the ship with Finn and all his ragtag group of people and everything that he's doing. I thought that side of it worked. All the spaceships flying around, it was just too much. That wasn't like, you didn't have this thing. It was like Poe is trying to do that, or you should contrast it with like Return of the Jedi. So Lando's leading this crew of people to go into the Death Star to blow it up, but the shield is still up, and so it's a trap. They're stuck there. Fleet shows up behind them, so they're trying to survive. And so you have these sequences where you have Lando being like, get as close as possible so they can't do this, and we have to do this, and they're trying to survive. And then we move from survival mode to like, let's go in. But you always know exactly what they're trying to do, and it's like a lot like handle the strategy, what they're happening. I just don't feel that in the J.J. Abrams ones. So we're going through the battle, and then they're losing. They're not doing it quick enough. And so you have this moment where Poe, like, guys, I really thought we could make this happen. And then, guys, I really believed it, but we gave them everything we had, and we failed. And then through his headset, Lando says, on your left, referencing back to Winter Soldier. Oh, excuse me, wrong movie again. It wasn't a portal sequence. But Lando shows up in his headset in the exact same way that Falcon showed up in Captain America's headset at the same exact type of moment, saying, hey, you're not alone. Or maybe what was the line? There's not enough of you, but there's enough of us. Lando shows up, and it just cuts to this huge fleet doing the exact Portals moment from Endgame, the exact same setup of the entire thing, of the headset, all of it, except without any of the real payoff of it. Like, it's like, oh, this is just the movie cliche. So it's a classic movie cliche. Send in the cavalry, that you're watching it, our heroes think they're going to lose, and then send in the cavalry. Someone shows up last minute to save the day. You can go through all sorts of movies with these big battles like this where we think all is lost, and then the cavalry shows up at the last minute. Very classic big battle movie trope, action movie trope for that to happen. As soon as you know that that's a trick that they do, you see it all the time. And one of the best uses of it of all time is Endgame. It's a trope, absolutely. But the way it was used was so incorporated into the entire plot line of the rest of the movie that, like, we, on an intellectual level, knew that they had saved these people because we saw the phone call from Hawkeye's wife, and they looked out and they saw, like, life to the world. And then the movie, they're attacked by Thanos, and so we kind of forgot that they're out there. And so then when everybody shows up, it's the payoff of the entire journey of this movie. So it's not just that the cavalry showed up. It's like, that's right, they saved it. Like, we'd almost forgotten about that. And Doctor Strange has his magic moment to bring them all in. And it doesn't work in this movie the same way. It's just the cavalry shows up because they had this loose theme of people didn't show up in the last movie. They're not going to show up this time. Maybe they'll show up. Let's send out Lando. But they didn't earn it. They didn't build up to it so that as everybody shows up, you're like, oh, they did come. It's just the cliche of the cavalry showing up, trying to be as exciting. And then even the way the movie plays out, it's like all these ships show up, like, take out those cannons underneath the ships. They start doing that a little bit. And then 2 seconds later, Palpatine's like, shooting lightning up into the air, and ships are falling down. And so it's not even like you get the big, massive fan service payoff of Endgame where it's like all these people that we've been waiting for show up, they show up, and then they do something cool. It's just like we just see an insanely large army that's way over the top, and then we see Palpatine's army that's way over the top, and just it's kind of visual noise at a certain point in time. It's not like exciting. It's just like there's a lot of stuff that I am seeing right now. So I don't think that the space battle hit it like the notes that it should have. The ground stuff with Finn, I thought, did, because it was personal. You knew what he was trying to do in each moment and why he was doing it. The sacrifices that he was kind of making, all of that stuff worked fine. But for whatever reason, JJ is just not good with the space battle stuff of making them have oomph and power to them, and this one is once again a case of that. And finally, we have our showdown with Palpatine and our heroes, specifically Rey and a little bit of Ben Solo running in at the last moment. And I think this was always going to be a tricky one because I like the idea of Palpatine returning, but even with the direction they took that, what do you have as the actual climax of that battle with everything else going on? And the idea of the tension, the conflict, and, you know, the connection between Kylo and Rey and what Palpatine would do with that, and absorbing, I thought all of those kind of worked. But I think that for the sequence to really pay off and you feel the most of it, you just wanted more there. You just want more action there. It's like that's for a movie that's just jam-packed with a lot of action and big action, the place where you kind of wanted it the most and it kind of needed there the most, there wasn't that. And so you have Rey just walks in. Like Rey walks in and has a chat with him, and then she holds up lightsabers, and that, you know, and then, you know, Palpatine says, I am inevitable, and Rey says, I am Iron Man. Oh, wait, excuse me, that's not what he says, I am all the Sith, and then she says, and I am all the Jedi. Just like the line of dialogue in Endgame, right before she exerts herself entirely and dies from it. Like, same exact thing once again. But like you just wanted more there, something from them. And so they take out a couple of these little guys around there, the Knights of Renn. But like you get redeemed Ben Solo, and you're just pumped to see Ben Solo throw down. And he spends like 20 seconds taking out these guys with a lightsaber. There's a little trickery with Rey and the lightsaber, but you don't really get the payoff like at all that you wanted. Once again, if you had a movie of redeemed Ben Solo, you can't. Like, you get the payoff. When you have him being redeemed right before the climax of your movie, there's just not a lot of room to do anything. I think that's what happens when you microwave your movie. So we have the showdown, and I thought, the tension, the dynamics, it just didn't seem like you could they kind of built a scenario where Rey was tempted, but not quite enough. It didn't seem like once again, we just have to find a way to like microwave it. So it's like, they're all going to die unless you turn over to me right now. So I don't know. It's like one of those ones that was like, you're almost there. I can almost buy into this. I like the idea of all of this, the actual final payoff of it. It's just not where it needs to be. recurring theme, microwaved, as opposed to slow cooked. You just had to rush to all of it to get to all the plot points, and so none of them are as impactful and potent. So then you have Rey uses all the Jedi, and I hope there's I need to look up one of these articles to find out what all the voices were. I'd be love to see all the little voice cameos that were there inside of her head. She finally takes him out by channeling all of the Jedi, exerts herself fully, dies. Kylo walks up and does the Force healing thing. Wakes up, two of them kiss. I think you kind of had to have something like that because otherwise their relationship is too ill-defined. We've spent all of these movies kind of teasing what it is, what it could be, all these things like that. And we haven't stated yes, this is a romance thing. And so then they think you have to have that moment there to just like seal it just enough. I guess that hopefully they're also, not hopefully, I don't. So there's always a speculation of exactly, did Palpatine, like to what degree did Palpatine create Anakin? Is he his father? Like there's all the kind of this rumor speculation from what George has said that he kind of thought about what was and wasn't kind of put in there. Hopefully that solidifies that Palpatine is not Anakin's father, because that makes for a very weird kiss, I guess, but weird incestual kisses are part of Star Wars. So but I would take that hopefully to mean that, Palpatine is not, biologically speaking, Anakin's father, probably, in a sense like that. But so they kiss. I was kind of okay with that. And then Kylo Ren dies. I think, once again, you kind of had to have that. Because how do you have him come back and be like, hey, guys, I'm Ben. Kylo was that other guy. Kylo was the jerk. I'm Ben. I don't think that works. So you kind of had to, close out his storyline in a way like that. At the same time, once again, all of this, we didn't get I wish we had more time with him. I just wish that we had more time to kind of get to know him a little bit better. Now, the big problem here, the lingering problem that's inside of this movie, that's a J.J. Abrams problem, I guess, in general, is that he seems to love the idea of cheating death. And so he comes up with plot devices that are very problematic to have a character die and come back. He did it in Star Trek Into Darkness, and introduces immortality and cheating death into the world of Star Trek, which does not fit in Star Trek at all. And the way that they did it, it's like, what are you thinking? Like, all the doors that this opens is a problem. And so that likewise is in this movie. If you go, wait a minute, Jedi can force heal, and pass off life like this. There's been a lot of people that have died that probably shouldn't have died. And there are big plot lines inside of these movies where Darth Maul gives a little poke to Qui-Gon. Obi-Wan defeats him. Qui-Gon's still talking. Why didn't Obi-Wan know about this trick? To bring him back a little bit. Obviously, if this was a trick that you could just do, Anakin's motivation, Padme, problematic. There's some issues inside of this. So JJ just loves to kind of cut some of those corners and loves to move forward and just let's keep going. Doesn't always think about how it creates some problems inside of your mythology when you do some of this stuff. So that is the bigger problem, I think, inside of all of this. So then we go into our final sequence of the movie where you're going to get the celebration. Everybody hugs each other and then fades out. And I was like, feels like there's probably going to be a little bit more, one more scene on here, and then it fades back in, and we're back on Tatooine to kind of close it out. And I guess it made sense to go there, and she buries the two lightsabers, and has this moment where someone says, "What's your name?" And she pauses for a second, looks over, and then Luke and Leia are like waving at her, "Hey!" And she's like, "I'm Rey Skywalker." I like, but. I feel like a broken record. I like the idea of it. The specific way the scene plays out probably could have been done a little bit better. It was a little bit odd in the way that specific moment plays out inside of it, where it's like we wanted to have, in the final scene, we wanted three things. We want Force Ghosts. You gotta have Force Ghosts in that last scene. We want the Rey Skywalker, and we wanted the final shot of the twin sons staring off into the distance. One of those three things, and so they're all crammed in there and didn't fold naturally. The idea of it I liked. The idea that, it was kind of woven into the movie of like which legacy you choose is more important than what you were born with, as kind of in there. It's a kind of a nice little touch. So I was fine with that side to it. Some people ask me what I think about her having a yellow lightsaber. I don't think anything of it. I don't have any strong thoughts on lightsaber colors at all. I like the idea that she made her own. I think that's good, that she's choosing her own path, her own legacy, and it's no longer about having other people's sabers. She's made her own. I dig all of that. Specific color, cool, it's a different color. I don't care. That'd be kind of my take on it. So, I don't know. In general, with all of this, that language I figured out while doing this, that the whole movie, it felt like a microwaved Star Wars movie. And I eat a lot of microwave dinners, so that's not necessarily an insult, but it does mean that it's not like premium stuff. It's not gourmet food. It's not fantastic. It's a decent fast food meal to me, or decent microwave cooked meal to me. That's what this was. It's maybe in another language, some of you resonate with this one. It's Star Wars leftovers. That if you like leftovers, sometimes that's okay. And some people hate leftovers and they're awful. That's kind of what this movie was, that it just needed more time to cook. It needed more time to tell its story because there's just too much here that it needed to do. And the specific plot points, I was fine with all of them. I wasn't like, there's too much fan service. It was much more to me of like, these moments still feel earned. I needed more time with it. So I enjoyed it. I didn't love it. It's a TV dinner, microwave TV dinner, the movie. That's what this was for me. Tell me what you thought down below in the comment section. If you don't know, I did spoiler reviews for all the episodes in the Skywalker Saga. It's right over there. You can check that out. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.